Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time, way back, to a night market in ancient China, where the air is so thick with steam and spice that it almost feels alive. You can smell sesame oil before you even see the stalls, and somewhere a wok hisses so loud it sounds like applause. Candles and lanterns sway on strings overhead, painting everything in a warm, wobbly glow that makes you feel like you've stumbled into a dream. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to peanuts, though, fair warning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you guys are tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the first row of stalls, your shoes kicking up a bit of dust that immediately mixes with the smell of soy and sizzling garlic. Somewhere nearby, you hear the unmistakable clink of a bronze spatula against a shallow wok, followed by a wave of laughter from a group of students crouched on stools. A hawker shouts about hot buns stuffed with pork, and you can practically hear the steam escape when he cracks one open to show off the juicy filling. Your stomach growls loudly enough that the lady at the next stall smirks at you. Ancient Chinese night markets were famous for being noisy, bustling affairs. The Tang dynasty especially loved turning dining into a spectacle, with musicians playing near the food stalls just to keep the energy up. A man with a tray of candied hawthorn skewers brushes past you, and the sugar shell crunches when a kid bites into one. You catch yourself grinning. There's something hypnotic about the rhythm of sounds here, the slap of dough as a vendor stretches noodles on a wooden counter, the pop and crackle as tiny oil droplets leap from the pan, the quick chorus of coins hitting a tray when someone pays. The market has its own music, and you're starting to tune in. You pause by a wok where a cook is making chow fan, fried rice, before fried rice was even considered a common dish. He flips the contents with a single swift motion, the grains hitting the sides with a hiss before raining back down. Mainstream historians agree that shallow woks and high-heat stir-frying really took off in the late Han and Tang periods, thanks to more efficient charcoal fuels. But there's still debate about whether these markets sold to everyone equally or kept the best ingredients for the wealthy. Tonight, though, it seems like everybody's eating happily, from dusty travelers to silk-clad officials. You overhear a guy nearby bragging about his secret recipe dumplings and wonder if that's really a thing or just good marketing. Some researchers say the first dumplings were invented by a doctor named Zhang Zhongjing to keep people from getting frostbite, because what else do you do but wrap meat in dough when the snow starts falling? It makes you laugh to imagine a guy accidentally inventing one of the world's most beloved snacks just because he was tired of cold ears. The further you walk, the louder the sounds get. Dogs bark, chickens protest from cages, someone is arguing loudly about the price of lotus roots. The night market is like an early version of a food court but with a lot more personality. Every sound tells you what's cooking before you even get there. The rhythmic scraping of a ladle means congee, the quick chop 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 of cleavers means someone's prepping stir-fry, and the heavy thunk means a butcher is doing his thing, maybe not the best lullaby, but strangely comforting all the same. You sit down on a wobbly stool and let the sounds wash over you. The chatter blends into a background hum, the same way rain does when you're trying to fall asleep. A musician nearby plucks a pipa, and the melody slides right under the sizzle of the oil, like the whole market is jamming together. Someone drops a jar and it shatters, and for a second everyone goes quiet, then just like that, the noise picks back up. It's chaos, but it's beautiful chaos, and you're in the middle of it. As you nibble a fried dough twist, you wonder if people back then ever got tired of all this noise, or if silence would have felt weird. Historians still argue whether these markets were open every night or just on special occasions, but if they were this lively every evening, you can imagine they became a kind of nightly entertainment. You sip some warm rice wine and it makes your cheeks glow, which feels perfect under the lantern light. The oil pops one last time, a vendor laughs, and the smell of charred scallions floats past you. You lean back on your stool, full and a little drowsy, letting the hum of the market lull you into a slower rhythm. This place isn't just about eating, it's about hearing, smelling, and soaking up the whole experience until it feels like part of you. The stool creaks as you stand, brushing crumbs from your lap, and you follow the faint sound of porcelain tapping in the distance. The noise is softer here, less chaotic than the market, as if someone has turned down the volume. You duck under a low wooden beam and find yourself in a scholar's courtyard, where moonlight pools across carefully raked gravel. A table is already set for a late meal, and the soundscape is entirely different, gentle, measured, almost refined. You hear the delicate clink of porcelain bowls as servants arrange them, a sound so light it's more like glass bells than dishes. You realize this is what eating sounds like when people actually have time to savor it. Porcelain is everywhere, a luxury so prized in the Tang and Song dynasties that foreign traders literally called it white gold. The way it rings when knocked gently by a spoon is unmistakable, a clear, soft chime that makes even simple rice seem elegant. You sit on a carved wooden stool, noting how quiet everyone is at first, just the faint scrape of wooden spoons as they test the temperature of the congee. Then, slowly, the room warms up with conversation, laughter bubbling like the teapots near the edge of the table. Someone pours wine from a long-spouted ewer, and you hear the thin stream hit the side of the cup with a high, clear note. It's strangely relaxing, like listening to a fountain. The first bite of food gets a little chorus of appreciative murmurs, the universal human sound of, "Oh wow, this is good." Historians say porcelain dining sets became a status symbol during this era, a way to show you had taste and money, but there's still debate about whether most households owned full sets or just a few special pieces for guests. You suspect this house falls into the "we own everything and then some" category. The meal continues, and the sounds layer together, the faint tap of chopsticks on the rim of a bowl, a quiet sigh when someone sips hot broth, the gentle thunk as a serving spoon is laid back onto the table. Compared to the night market's orchestra of chaos, this is chamber music, soft, deliberate, with pauses that make you notice each sound more. You hear someone slurp noodles, not rudely, just efficiently, and the whole table chuckles. Apparently, noodle slurping has been socially acceptable here for centuries. As you lean forward to grab a bite, your sleeve brushes the table, making one of the bowls ring. It's such a pure, bell-like sound that you almost want to do it again on purpose, like running a finger along a wine glass rim. Porcelain really does sing if you treat it gently enough. A quirky fact you might not expect, archaeologists have found ancient porcelain bowls that still ring today when tapped, despite spending hundreds of years buried. It's like they've been holding on to their sound just waiting for someone to wake them up. The host's youngest child is playing with a wooden spoon, drumming softly on the table legs. No one scolds him, it just becomes part of the evening's rhythm. The family dog pads across the floor, nails clicking softly against the tiles. Somewhere outside, a cricket chirps, adding an accidental backbeat. You start to realize that even in the quiet parts of ancient China, meals had their own little concerts going on. A servant clears empty bowls, stacking them carefully so they don't clatter too loud. You notice how different the sound is compared to modern plates, lighter, almost shy. Some historians argue that part of porcelain's appeal was exactly this, it turned mealtime into a softer, more graceful experience compared to heavier bronze or clay dishes. You imagine a table full of bronze vessels from earlier times, every bite accompanied by a clang, and think yeah, maybe porcelain was an upgrade for the ears as much as the eyes. The wine makes everyone a little chatty, and soon laughter fills the room. Someone tells a joke about a pompous prefect who mistook a chamber pot for a teapot, a classic, apparently, and the sound of giggles bounces off the courtyard walls. You can't help but join in, nearly choking on your rice cake in the process. The night air carries the sound upward, where it probably mingles with the distant hum of the market you just left behind. When the meal winds down, there's a final rustle of sleeves as everyone bows slightly to thank the host. The table is nearly silent now, just a faint crackle from the oil lamp. You lean back, taking in the moment, the echo of spoons, the lingering laughter, the calm after a meal well enjoyed. It's a completely different soundscape than the market, but just as alive. You stand, your stool scraping softly against the stone floor, and step back into the night. The air is cooler, the crickets louder, and somewhere in the distance you think you can still hear the clear chime of porcelain, ringing like a memory you'll carry with you as you wander further. The path turns rough beneath your feet and you soon smell smoke, not the fragrant sesame oil of the market, but the heavy, earthy smoke of burning wood. You follow it until you see firelight spilling from a massive hall built of timber and clay. Inside, the noise hits you all at once, the hiss of boiling water, the clang of bronze lids, the deep hum of voices. You've stepped straight into a Zhou dynasty feast, and it sounds like an entire village is working to keep it going. Right away, the most commanding sound is the hiss of the great bronze cauldrons, or ding, standing on 3 legs over open fires. The steam bursts out in loud, wet sighs, like the pots themselves are impatient for the feast to begin. Somewhere in the courtyard, a goat lets out a loud, complaining bleat, as if it just realized it might not be invited to dessert. You glance around and catch sight of servants leading animals toward the kitchens, the ground echoing under their hooves. The noise of butchery is faint but unmistakable, a series of dull thunks as cleavers meet wood. Not exactly bedtime ASMR, but somehow it feels like an essential part of this soundscape. Bronze vessels clink against each other as they're carried past you, their deep tones ringing like gongs every time they bump. Historians know these cauldrons weren't just for cooking, they were status symbols, sometimes even ceremonial, each one marked with inscriptions that said, "Look how important we are." There's still debate about whether the sound of so many dings together was intentional, like a dinner bell orchestra, or just a happy accident of mass cooking. Either way, the result is hypnotic, like low church bells playing in unison. You notice the rhythm of preparation is almost militaristic. Teams of cooks chop in sync, their cleavers hitting the boards like drumbeats. A server calls out orders to keep the timing right, roasts need to be ready at the same moment as the millet porridge and steamed greens. For a second, it feels like you're standing in the middle of a battlefield, except the war cry is, "Don't burn the duck." One quirky little fact you might not expect, some of these feasts used musical ensembles right in the kitchen. Bells and chimes would play while the food was being prepared, the idea being that proper music encouraged proper flavor. Whether that actually improved the stew is, let's just say historians still argue about it. But it does make you wonder if the cooks had to stay on beat or risk messing up the seasoning. You edge closer to one of the great cauldrons, and the steam fogs your face. The bubbling is constant and loud, like a giant was breathing just under the surface. You can smell bone broth, garlic, ginger, it's basically an ancient hot pot, and the sound of the liquid rolling and bumping against the bronze is as comforting as a rainstorm. Someone stirs with a long wooden paddle, and the paddle makes a hollow knocking noise each time it hits the sides. Nearby, the head chef, if you can call him that, barks instructions in a clipped voice. He points to a tray of steamed buns and then to the dancers waiting near the doorway. Apparently, the meal and entertainment have to be perfectly timed. You hear a flute player testing a note, the sound shrill and clear over the kitchen's rumble. The music mixes with the kitchen noise, and suddenly it feels like you're part of some ritual, because, in a way, you are. As the food is plated, the sounds shift. Bronze ladles scrape the bottoms of cauldrons, pulling up the last bits of flavor. Dishes are carried out in a clatter of footsteps, the trays rattling just enough to make you nervous. The first guests in the hall let out pleased exclamations, which ripple down the line until the whole space is buzzing with approval. The goat has gone quiet, either because it's far away now or because it's, well, part of the menu. You choose not to dwell on that and focus on the table instead. The sound of the first toast fills the room, a resonant clink of bronze goblets, followed by a chorus of deep-throated cheers. There's nothing shy about this meal. People slurp, crunch, and laugh with their mouths full, and no one seems to care. You take a seat near the edge and let the feast wash over you. The constant backdrop is the bubbling of the last few cauldrons, now simmering gently as they keep the food warm. Someone drops a ladle, and it hits the floor with a gong-like clang, startling a few guests who then burst out laughing. You realize this is as much about sound as it is about taste. By the time the meal winds down, the fires are low, and the noise has softened to a tired murmur. The cauldrons hiss one last time as the lids are removed to scrape out the bottom. The air is thick with smoke and satisfaction, and you can almost hear the silence waiting outside as you step back into the night. The night air outside the feast hall feels cooler, fresher, and carries with it a new set of sounds, sharper, quicker, somehow hungrier. You follow the scent of charcoal and cumin until you reach a lively street where vendors are lined up shoulder to shoulder, their braziers glowing like miniature suns. This is the world of street snacks, where everything is cooked right in front of you and nothing stays quiet for long. The first thing you notice is the sound of skewers snapping as a vendor readies a new batch of lamb. The meat hits the grill with a sharp hiss, fat sizzling as it drips down into the fire. The smell is so good you're almost mad at yourself for just having eaten, but your stomach growls anyway. Apparently it thinks it has room for a midnight snack. Coins jingle as a customer pays, the vendor counting them out loud before tucking them into a pouch that rustles like dried leaves. You edge closer to watch the cooking, and the vendor flips the skewers with practiced speed, each turn punctuated by a little puff of smoke. Street food was a big deal in ancient Chinese cities, especially during the Song dynasty, when night markets and snack stalls became nearly as popular as restaurants. Mainstream historians even describe entire neighborhoods that specialized in particular dishes, noodle streets, bun streets, even dessert alleys. But there's still debate about whether the vendors use standard measurements or just eyeballed everything like your aunt who swears her pinch of salt is always perfect. A young man nearby is selling roasted chestnuts, and you can hear them pop inside their sand-filled drum. Each pop is like a tiny firecracker, and the smell that bursts out when he opens the lid is so sweet and earthy that you swear you can taste it just by breathing. A kid runs up, shouting excitedly, and the vendor laughs, handing him a paper cone of chestnuts that crackles softly as they cool. Next door, a woman is making bing, thin pancakes stuffed with scallions. The batter hits the griddle with a wet slap, followed by a quick, rhythmic scraping as she smooths it out. When it starts to brown, she uses her spatula to flip it, and the sound is crisp, almost like a drumbeat. You catch yourself tapping your foot in time. A quirky detail you wouldn't expect: some archaeologists have found ancient skewers made of bone, still charred at one end, as if someone had been caught mid-bite when history hit pause. It's strangely comforting to think that even thousands of years ago, someone was standing exactly where you are now, listening to the same crackle and hiss. Someone behind you sneezes dramatically, probably because of the chilly smoke drifting through the air, and you hear a chorus of good-natured chuckles. The whole street seems to share in every little moment. A dog barks, a baby cries, someone yells, "Extra sauce," and the vendor responds with a laugh and a splash that makes the grill hiss even louder. The clatter of clay cups tells you someone is selling drinks. You follow the sound until you find a man ladling out warm rice wine from a big ceramic jar. The liquid sloshes in a pleasing way, and the cup clicks softly when he sets it down in front of you. The wine is sweet and faintly spicy, warming your throat and making the night air feel softer. Historians still argue whether these bustling food stalls were seen as slightly scandalous by the upper class or embraced as a true melting pot of flavors and people. From what you're hearing tonight, you'd guess they were the best place to catch up on gossip. You can hear snatches of conversation everywhere: who got promoted, whose cousin eloped, whose duck ran away. Apparently that's a big deal. When you finally buy a skewer, the meat crunches at first bite, then drips with hot, savory juice. The sound of you chewing seems to vanish into the larger rhythm of the street, where everyone else is munching, slurping, and chatting. You're part of the noise now. The vendors start to wind down for the night. You hear them scraping the last bits of char off the griddles, snuffing the fires with a faint hiss, and packing away their wares with a soft wooden clatter. The last coins of the night jingle as hands are shaken in thanks. By the time you step away, the street is quieter, but the memory of sizzling skewers seems to echo in your ears like a favorite song. You leave the snack street behind and follow a narrow corridor lit by guttering torches until you come to a massive set of bronze doors. They creak open just enough for you to slip inside, and suddenly you're in the imperial kitchens. The noise hits like a wave. Cleavers are chopping in rapid-fire bursts, so steady and sharp they almost sound like a drumline keeping time. You hear cooks shouting orders, the occasional clang of a dropped lid, and the constant whoosh of bellows feeding the fire. It's a place that feels alive, like a giant animal breathing and grumbling all around you. You duck as a servant rushes past carrying a tray of steaming buns, their porcelain lids rattling with every step. The air is hot and smells of ginger, scallion, and something faintly sweet you can't quite place. The soundscape here is layered, metallic clinks of ladles against woks, sizzling oil that practically screams when a handful of greens is tossed in, and the low mutter of cooks reciting recipes under their breath like prayers. You hear the snap of a fan as someone tries to keep the smoke out of their eyes. Historians agree that palace kitchens in dynasties like Tang and Ming were enormous, with entire armies of cooks, but they still argue about just how many dishes might have been prepared for a single banquet. Some records claim over 100. Based on the racket in here, you're inclined to believe it. The clangs and chops are relentless, each sound a reminder that somewhere, a court official is expecting something extraordinary on his plate in about 10 minutes. At the far end of the room, a bell rings softly, and everyone moves faster. That little chime is a signal that a new course must be plated, and the flurry of motion that follows is almost musical. Plates are set down in perfect rhythm, and spoons make a quick scrape as sauces are spread and garnishes added. You can hear the faint crunch of fresh herbs being torn right before they hit the dish. A quirky tidbit you might not expect: some imperial kitchens had designated food tasters, and you can hear one now. Well, you can hear him cough politely after sampling a dish, which apparently means it's safe. You catch yourself wondering if that job came with good pay or just constant stomach anxiety. The head chef is barking orders in a booming voice that cuts through the din. He claps his hands once, and everyone freezes. You can hear the quiet crackle of the fires in the brief silence before he gives the next instruction, and then it's chaos again, the room exploding back into motion. Steam hisses as giant woks are rinsed, making a sound like applause. Knives get sharpened on whetstones with a rhythmic shh that reminds you of cicadas. Someone drops a bowl, and it shatters with a sharp crack that makes every head turn. There's a collective pause, then nervous laughter. Apparently nobody wants to be the reason the emperor's duck goes cold. You catch sight of a servant carrying a tray toward the door, each dish covered with a polished lid. The faint chime of metal as the lids bump together is strangely satisfying. This is the sound of perfection being escorted to the royal table. You follow at a safe distance and hear the change in atmosphere as soon as the doors open, the kitchen's roar giving way to the more dignified hum of the banquet hall. But you stay in the kitchen, because the best sounds are still here. Someone is pounding dough in the corner, and the heavy thuds feel like they're syncing with your heartbeat. Another cook stirs a bubbling pot of soup, the ladle making a deep, liquid glop with every turn. You think back to the street vendors from earlier and realize this is just a bigger, louder, shinier version of the same thing, except here, a single burnt scallion could technically cost someone their job. The last bell rings, and the kitchen finally begins to settle. Fires are banked, knives are set aside with a final clink, and the room exhales in a tired sigh. For a moment, it's almost peaceful, until someone sneezes, and half the cooks laugh, half groan. You slip back out into the hallway, ears still ringing from the intensity. The clatter, the bells, the muttered recipes, they're still echoing in your head like you've just stepped out of a rock concert, only this one smelled a lot better. The hallways narrow until they feel almost like secret passages, and then they open into a stone courtyard washed in silver moonlight. The sound here is gentler, calmer, a welcome change from the frenzied energy of the palace kitchens. You hear water dripping softly from a bamboo spout into a stone basin, the splash echoing like a whisper. A faint scent of pine smoke drifts past, and somewhere close by, a kettle gives a quiet sigh as it begins to boil. You've arrived at a temple where monks are preparing tea, and the first sound you notice is the rhythmic grinding of tea leaves on a stone mill. It's slow, steady, almost meditative, as the monk moves the heavy stone in circles. The powder falls into a wooden bowl with the softest rustle, like the sound of falling sand. You kneel nearby, watching, and realize you're holding your breath just to hear it better. tea wasn't always the refined ritual it is now. In the Tang dynasty, it was still a developing art, but people were already starting to take it seriously. Mainstream historians agree that the habit of whisking powdered tea into frothy foam came from this period, a practice that would eventually inspire Japanese tea ceremonies centuries later. But historians still argue whether early tea was more of a medicinal brew or just a pleasant drink for poets looking for inspiration. Based on the quiet reverence in this courtyard, you'd guess it was a little of both. The water begins to sing, tiny bubbles rattling the kettle before they rise to the surface with a faint popping sound. The monk picks up a bamboo whisk and begins to beat the tea powder into the hot water. The sound is delicate but fast, like a tiny broom sweeping in circles. It builds into a froth, and you can almost hear the foam forming, each bubble a soft sigh. A quirky tidbit you might not expect: some early tea manuals actually describe the perfect sound of boiling water, comparing it to things like wind in the pines or frogs croaking in a distant marsh. Tonight, you swear it really does sound like that, soft, melodic, and strangely alive. When the tea is ready, the cups are set down with a faint porcelain click, and the monks drink in near silence. The only noise is the occasional polite sip and the quiet rustle of robes as they shift on the wooden benches. You take a cup for yourself, and the warmth of it makes your fingers tingle. The tea is earthy, grassy, and just bitter enough to keep you awake. A breeze stirs the bamboo stalks at the edge of the courtyard, making them knock together with a hollow, wooden sound. Somewhere a bell rings, deep, resonant, the kind of sound that seems to settle right in your chest. The whole space feels tuned like an instrument, every sound chosen to lull you into stillness. The monk next to you clears his throat softly and hums a note that blends with the bell's echo. It's not exactly singing, but it fills the courtyard with a calm vibration. You sip again, letting the sound and the tea settle you. Historians still debate whether these temple teas were meant to keep monks alert during meditation or simply to create a communal rhythm, a pause in the day that everyone could share. Judging by the way the sounds of grinding, whisking, and sipping flow together, it feels like the answer is both. The last drops of tea are drunk, and the bowls are rinsed in silence, the water making a quick, cheerful splash as it hits the basin. The stone mill is covered again, and the courtyard grows even quieter. The only sound left is the steady drip from the bamboo spout, as if the temple itself is breathing slowly. You stand, bow slightly, and step back into the night, your ears tuned now to notice even the smallest sounds. The hush follows you as you walk, like the monks have sent it with you as a parting gift. The quiet from the temple clings to you as you walk, but soon another sound pulls you along, an irregular, almost comical symphony of gurgles, pops, and faint plops. You follow your ears until you reach a workshop that smells sharp and earthy, the air heavy with fermenting beans and rice. Here, the music isn't from instruments or chatter but from thousands of tiny bubbles, each one announcing that fermentation is alive and working. Large clay jars are lined up against the walls, their lids covered with straw mats. You crouch next to one and listen closely. There it is again, blorp, 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 like a lazy drumbeat from deep underwater. The sound is surprisingly loud once you tune into it, each bubble rising through the thick soy mash before popping at the surface with a soft, wet sigh. This is where soy sauce is born, a fact mainstream historians love to remind us about when talking about China's culinary legacy. The process can take months, and every day the mash sings its little bubbling song. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions were thick like miso paste or more liquid like the soy sauce we know now, but whichever it was treasured enough to warrant careful listening, literally. Some brewers judged progress by the sound, waiting for the right pitch of bubble before deciding it was ready. In another corner, a worker stirs a vat of rice wine. The paddle makes a slow, scraping noise, and the fermenting liquid answers back with a faint fizz, like a crowd murmuring in approval. You lean in closer and hear a higher-pitched fizz coming from a smaller jar, probably vinegar, which develops its own soft hiss as the alcohol turns sour. You wrinkle your nose at the smell, but it's oddly satisfying, like catching the first whiff of pickles opening. A quirky tidbit: some old brewing guides advised singing to the vats, believing that music could soothe the fermentation and lead to a smoother flavor. Tonight, a young apprentice is humming under his breath as he stirs, his tune blending with the bubbling chorus until you're not sure which is guiding which. You run your hand along the rim of a sealed jar, and the clay vibrates faintly from the pressure building inside. It's like holding a living heartbeat. The workers move quietly but purposefully, their sandals whispering against the packed earth floor. Every so often, someone lifts a lid to check the contents, and you hear a sharp hiss as the gases escape, like the jar is sighing in relief after holding its breath. Outside, near the wall, bundles of fermenting cabbage and radish sit under stones, turning into pickles. The vegetables give off a faint crackle as they release gases, and when a worker presses on them, you hear a wet squish that's both gross and weirdly satisfying. Historians still debate just how widely available these fermented goods were. Some say soy sauce and rice wine were mostly for the wealthy at first, while others argue they trickled down to the common folk pretty quickly. Judging by the sheer number of jars here, you'd guess demand was high enough that everyone eventually got a taste. You step back and take in the whole workshop as a kind of orchestra, the deep gurgle of soy vats, the fizzy hiss of rice wine, the plop of vinegar jars, the soft rustle of straw mats as they're lifted and replaced. It's strangely cozy, like standing in the middle of a kitchen that never stops breathing. As the night deepens, the sounds seem to slow with the workers. The stirring paddles make fewer circles, the humming grows softer, and soon all you're left with is the steady, patient bubbling that will continue long after you've gone. It's a reminder that some flavors take their time, and that even silence can have its own quiet rhythm. You step outside, and the cool night air feels like a shock after the warm, yeasty room. For a moment, you swear you can still hear the bubbles popping in your ears, a soft percussion that follows you down the road. You keep walking until the path widens into a bustling crossroads that feels very different from the quiet fermentation yard. The air is dry, spiced, and humming with voices speaking in half a dozen accents. You've stumbled into a Silk Road trade hub, and the first sound that hits you is the clatter of ceramic jars being unloaded from a cart. The jars knock together with hollow clinks, like someone playing a percussion instrument made of pottery. Camels shift their weight nearby, grumbling in a low, throaty way that sounds suspiciously like they're complaining about the long trip. The bells tied around their necks jingle every time they move, a soft, musical reminder that they've come from far away. You hear traders arguing in a mix of languages, their voices rising and falling like a song. It's about pepper, of course it's about pepper, and you can't help but smile at how seriously everyone takes it. Mainstream historians agree that pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and other spices traveled along these routes, turning meals across China into far more flavorful affairs. But historians still argue whether the average person got to taste them or whether they stayed locked up in wealthy kitchens. Based on the smell drifting through the air, tonight at least, they seem plentiful, cinnamon sweet, pepper sharp, and somewhere in the background, the resinous tang of frankincense burning to keep insects away. You wander closer to a stall where a man is scooping bright red Sichuan peppercorns into a bag. They rattle like tiny pebbles as they fall, making a dry, crackling sound that instantly makes your mouth tingle just thinking about it. A nearby woman is grinding cloves with a stone pestle, and the rhythmic thud of her work blends with the chatter around her. A quirky tidbit you might not expect: some traders traveled with small trained birds that mimicked certain words to attract customers, basically the ancient version of a talking shop sign. Sure enough, you hear a shrill little voice cry out something that sounds like hot pepper, and a group of kids laugh before running to see if the bird will repeat it. Someone uncorks a jar of imported sesame oil, and the smell rushes out so strong you can almost taste it. The sound is faint but distinct, the pop of the seal, followed by a glug-glug as the oil is poured into a smaller vessel for sale. A buyer shakes the jar next to his ear, listening for impurities like a sommelier might swirl wine. The road is alive with motion. Hooves clop against the hard-packed ground, wheels squeak under heavy loads, and coins clink as deals are sealed. Somewhere behind you, a musician is playing a two-stringed erhu, its sad, drawn-out notes floating through the dusty air like a breeze. It gives the whole marketplace a strangely cinematic feel, like you've wandered into a slow-motion montage of history happening in real time. Historians still debate how much of these spices were used in everyday cooking versus being kept as medicine, but you overhear someone bragging about a lamb stew so spicy it makes the tongue dance, which definitely sounds culinary rather than medicinal. Another trader is telling a story about a pepper shipment lost in a sandstorm, his hands waving so dramatically that his bracelets jingle with each gesture. You buy a small paper packet of cinnamon, and it rustles softly as you tuck it into your sleeve. The smell clings to you, warm and sweet, mixing with the faintly sweaty aroma of the camel caravan as it lumbers away. The bells jingle one last time, fading until all that's left is the murmur of traders still haggling under the stars. The market quiets as the fires are banked for the night. The jars are stacked carefully so they don't knock together, the last coins are counted, and even the parroting bird gives one final squawk before settling into silence. You walk on with your cinnamon packet still rustling softly, carrying a little piece of the Silk Road with you as you fade into the next stretch of night. The spice market chatter fades behind you, replaced by a cozy, rhythmic clatter. You follow it through a narrow alley until you see lantern lights spilling from a family courtyard. You peek inside and find a dinner table already alive with noise, the sound of bamboo chopsticks tapping bowls in a cheerful, percussive beat. You slip off your shoes and sit cross-legged at the low table, and immediately a pair of chopsticks is shoved into your hand. The first sound you make is an awkward little tap as you try to get the grip right. Don't worry, you're not alone. The table is full of children who are drumming their chopsticks on the rim of their bowls, laughing while their parents pretend to scold them. Someone sets down a giant bowl of noodles in the middle, and suddenly everyone leans forward. The noodles are ladled out with a quick splash, and before you know it the air is filled with slurping. Loud, unapologetic, enthusiastic slurping. In this household, it's not rude, it's practically a compliment to the cook. The noise is so steady and rhythmic that you almost feel like you're listening to a song. Mainstream historians agree that chopsticks had become common by the Han Dynasty, replacing knives at the table and making meals quieter, or at least less dangerous. But historians still argue whether families really encouraged this kind of boisterous slurping or if etiquette manuals just pretended everyone ate politely. Tonight's dinner makes you think the etiquette books were being optimistic. The clatter grows as more dishes arrive, stir-fried greens that hiss as they're spooned onto plates, dumplings that thud softly when dropped onto the table. A teapot whistles faintly from the corner, and the sound of pouring is almost musical as the stream hits the cups with a light, ringing splash. You sip and hear yourself swallow, realizing that even this small sound gets swallowed up by the family's chatter. A quirky little detail: some old stories claim children used to test if their parents were mad by tapping their chopsticks against their bowls. If the parents snapped, they knew it was time to behave. Here, no one seems mad at all. The chopstick tapping turns into a little rhythm game, and even Grandma joins in, her bamboo sticks clicking in perfect time. Someone cracks a joke, probably about your noodle slurping technique, and the whole table bursts into laughter. You're laughing too hard to hold your chopsticks steady, and they clatter noisily onto the floor. The youngest child immediately imitates you, dropping his own with an exaggerated gasp. The resulting giggles shake the whole table. The meal continues in waves. Chopsticks make a soft tick-tick as they pick up tofu cubes, then a sharper knock as they hit the bowl for more. The sounds of chewing and talking blend together until they feel like background music, cozy and familiar. Even the dog under the table gets in on it, his tail thumping against the floor in a steady beat. Historians still argue about whether every family shared from one big communal bowl or had individual portions, but tonight it's definitely communal. When the last noodle is fished out, there's a satisfied cheer, followed by a scraping sound as the bowl is cleaned with a final splash of broth. When the meal ends, the chopsticks are laid neatly across the bowls, making one last soft click as if closing a song. The children are sent to rinse their mouths at the water jar, their giggles trailing off into the yard. You sit back, listening to the faint sound of dishes being washed in the kitchen, porcelain knocking together softly, water sloshing like a gentle stream. The courtyard grows quiet, but not completely. Crickets start chirping, a neighbor's rooster mutters in its sleep, and somewhere you hear another family still slurping noodles in the distance. It's like the whole neighborhood is humming along to the same tune, a lullaby made of chopstick taps and noodle slurps. The courtyard slowly dims behind you as you step back onto the road, but your ears are already chasing a new sound, a deep, hollow thok that echoes off the alley walls. You follow it until you find yourself standing outside a butcher's shop just as the night's work begins. The noise is steady and unhurried, like a drumbeat that doesn't need an audience. You peek in and see a butcher raising a cleaver high above his head before bringing it down on a thick wooden block. The blade lands with a satisfying, resonant thud that seems to travel right through the floor. Each cut is perfectly measured, the rhythm almost hypnotic: raise, swing, thud, pause, repeat. Mainstream historians agree that animal butchery in ancient China was highly specialized, with distinct trades for pork, beef, and poultry. Meat wasn't eaten every day by commoners, but when it was, the sound of cleavers working in the evening must have been familiar. Historians still argue whether the average family bought their meat fresh like this or received it pre-cut from markets, but judging from the careful work you're seeing, watching the process might have been part of the experience. The butcher pauses to sharpen his blade, and the rasp of metal on stone cuts through the night like a zipper being pulled. Sparks fly briefly, lighting up his face, before the steady chopping begins again. Off to the side, a helper is plucking a chicken, the feathers coming off with soft ripping sounds and the occasional sneeze as the fluff drifts into the air. You catch a quirky tidbit from the helper. He hums as he works, a little tune that's probably been passed down as a kind of work rhythm. Some sources even suggest butchers had songs timed to the steps of processing meat, both to keep their cuts even and to keep apprentices from falling asleep on the job. The smells here are strong: raw meat, warm blood, smoke from the small fire where scraps are being burned. It's not exactly appetizing, but it's strangely grounding. You hear bones crack under the weight of the cleaver, followed by a soft plop as cuts of meat are tossed into a waiting basket. The butcher works quickly, and soon the basket is full, the pieces knocking against one another with a wet, muted sound as he hands them over to a waiting customer. You step aside to avoid a bucket of water being dumped onto the ground. It splashes with a loud, satisfying slap before trickling into the dust. Somewhere nearby, dogs bark, probably hoping for scraps, and you hear a cat yowl before scampering off into the dark. When the final cut is made, the butcher wipes his cleaver on a cloth with a squeak that somehow sounds final, like a cymbal closing a song. He lays the blade down gently, and for a moment the shop is quiet except for the faint hiss of the fire outside. Historians still debate whether ritual slaughter chants were actually sung by butchers in everyday life or reserved for special sacrifices, but tonight you could swear the slow rhythm of the chopping had its own ceremonial weight. You leave with the sound of the cleaver still echoing in your ears, like a heartbeat that's been following you through this entire journey. As you step out of the shop, the road feels oddly empty without the steady thok in the background. Even your footsteps sound too loud for a moment. Somewhere far away, you hear another cleaver strike, and you imagine dozens of shops just like this one all across the city, all working to the same hidden tempo. The night feels quieter now, but not in a lonely way, more like the city is tucking itself in after a long day of eating and preparing. The sound of a single last chop fades behind you, leaving you with the rhythmic memory of the butcher's work still playing in your mind. The road leads you out of the city gates and into the countryside, where the night air feels cooler and softer. Soon you hear a new kind of rhythm, not clanging, not slurping, but a creaking, groaning sort of music. You follow the sound until you see a water wheel turning slowly in the moonlight, its wooden spokes dipping into the river with a splash before rising again to dump water into a trough. Each turn is accompanied by a deep groan from the axle, as if the wheel is complaining but doing its job anyway. This water wheel drives a mill, and as you step closer, you hear the lower, steady rumble of a stone grinding against another stone. Inside the mill house, a farmer is feeding soaked soybeans into the grinder, and the stones crush them with a sound like muffled thunder. The rhythm is slow, patient, endless: grind, scrape, grind. Mainstream historians agree that stone mills like this were key to making tofu, which was already popular by the Han Dynasty. The sound you're hearing might be one of the oldest food factory noises in history. Historians still argue whether tofu began as a fancy vegetarian temple dish or a clever way for farmers to stretch their protein supply, but either way, its production would have sounded just like this. You watch as the soybean slurry is collected and boiled, filling the air with a soft hiss and a smell that's both nutty and grassy. The bubbling pot pops occasionally, like tiny applause for the farmer's work. The curds form slowly, and when the farmer scoops them into a cloth, you hear a wet squelch, followed by a drip 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 as the whey drains away into a bucket. A quirky little detail you learn from the farmer: some people claimed you could predict the quality of tofu by the sound of the curds forming. Too many loud pops meant the batch would turn out grainy. Tonight, the pops are gentle, and the farmer nods with satisfaction, so you take that as a good sign. Outside, another wheel-driven contraption is pounding rice into flour. The pounding log falls with a deep, hollow thud that echoes across the quiet countryside. Each thud shakes the ground just slightly under your feet, and you find yourself matching your breathing to the rhythm. The night here is otherwise peaceful. Crickets sing, frogs croak from the riverbank, and somewhere in the distance you hear the faint whoop of an owl. The combination of natural and mechanical sounds is strangely soothing, almost like listening to an ancient white noise machine. Historians still debate whether this kind of milling was done mostly at night or during the day, but working in the cool darkness certainly makes sense. The moonlight glints off the moving water wheel, and for a moment it looks like a giant clock slowly ticking away the hours. The farmer finishes pressing the tofu, and when he opens the cloth, there's a soft tearing sound as the curds pull away. He cuts the block into squares with a wooden knife, the blade making a dull, satisfying thwack with each slice. The tofu pieces are stacked carefully, their soft sides sticking together with a faint squish before being packed into a basket. As you leave, you take one last listen. The water wheel creaks on, the stones keep grinding, and the pounding log falls in its steady beat. You realize that even when the city is quiet, the countryside never really stops working, or singing. The sounds follow you back down the road like a lullaby you didn't know you needed, deep and slow enough to make your eyelids heavy. The road curves back toward the outskirts of town, and just when you think the night has gone completely quiet, a sharp metallic clang slices through the air. You follow the noise until you find a line of glowing forges casting flickering light across the street. This is the district where cookware is born, and tonight the smiths are working late. You step inside one workshop, and the heat hits you like opening an oven. The smith is hammering a sheet of metal into the shape of a wok, and every strike of his hammer rings out like a gong, clear, bright, and almost musical. The sound bounces off the walls, filling the entire space. It's hypnotic, the same note ringing again and again, punctuated by the hiss of steam when the hot metal is quenched in water. Mainstream historians agree that the wok became a staple of Chinese cooking early on, prized for its efficiency and versatility. But historians still argue whether woks were widespread among poorer households or mostly used in wealthier kitchens at first. Judging by how many you see stacked in this workshop, it seems safe to say everyone wanted one eventually. Nearby, another craftsman is riveting iron rings to a pot. Each strike makes a sharper, higher-pitched tink-tink, like someone playing a little bell. The combination of deep hammer thuds and light ringing turns the entire workshop into a kind of percussion section. A quirky tidbit from this district: some smiths believed that the sound of the hammer revealed the future durability of the pan. If the tone rang clear and high, the metal was strong. If it sounded dull, they might reheat and rework it until it sang properly. You lean closer, and sure enough, this wok is practically singing at every blow. Sparks fly in tiny bursts, crackling as they scatter across the dirt floor. You can hear the bellows breathing heavily in the corner, feeding the fire with a steady whoosh 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 that sounds almost alive. Each time the flames flare, the smith's shadow dances huge on the wall, like a giant keeping rhythm with the hammer. The air smells of hot iron and ash, and every so often you hear the smith splash water on the forge floor to keep the dust down, sending up a sharp hiss. When the wok is finally shaped, it's set aside with a ringing clang that sounds like the end of a performance. Historians still debate how much sound control these smiths used intentionally. Did they enjoy the ringing as a kind of music, or was it just part of the job? Tonight, it feels like music, especially when another forge joins in with a slightly different pitch, creating a strange, harmonious duet. Outside the workshop, stacks of finished woks, pots, and ladles clatter softly against each other in the breeze. You give one a gentle tap, and it rings back at you, a single bright note in the quiet night. Further down the street, you pass a man mending bamboo steamers. His knife scrapes softly as he pares the edges, the sound a soothing counterpoint to the hammering behind you. When he ties the steamer together with thin strips of bamboo, they make a faint, creaky little squeal, like the object itself is stretching and settling into place. As you walk away, the sounds blend together into a symphony of fire, metal, and wood, the hiss of steam, the ring of hammers, the soft whisper of bamboo being shaved. It's the soundtrack of future meals, the quiet promise of countless dinners to come. The ringing lingers in your ears as you move back toward the heart of the town, the last hammer strike fading like the final note of a lullaby played on a very loud gong. By now, the city feels like it's dozing, but your ears catch a softer, almost secretive sound, the whisper of grinding spices and herbs. You follow the faint noise down a side street and find yourself at an apothecary, its doorway lit by a single lantern swaying in the breeze. Inside, the smell hits you first, earthy, sharp, a little sweet. Then you hear the steady srrrk of a stone pestle grinding against a mortar. The apothecary looks up, nods, and keeps working. The sound of grinding is mesmerizing, smooth, circular, unhurried. It's quieter than the clanging forges or the chopping butchers, yet it feels just as important. The fine powder being made here will end up in medicine, sure, but also in food, cinnamon, star anise, fennel, ginger. Mainstream historians agree that cooks and herbalists often overlapped in ancient China, with some recipes doubling as health tonics. But historians still argue whether this blending of kitchen and pharmacy was for genuine medical reasons or just a clever excuse to make dinner taste better. Judging by how aromatic this place is, you suspect both. You watch as the apothecary pours ground spice into a paper packet. It makes a dry, rustling sound, almost like leaves in autumn. Then he ties it with twine, the knot pulling tight with a faint squeak. Somewhere in the back, water boils in a small cauldron, bubbling softly like a contented cat purring. A quirky tidbit the apothecary shares with a grin: some healers believe that the sound of the pestle should be like a drum in heaven, steady and resonant, because uneven grinding meant an uneven dose, which could throw off the medicine entirely. He even lets you try it, and your first few grinds are embarrassingly squeaky until you get into the rhythm. Outside the shop, you hear a night watchman strike a wooden clapper, warning of the hour. The sharp talk echoes down the empty street, blending oddly with the soft grinding inside. It's a reminder that the city is still awake in its own way, even this late. The apothecary finishes his work and carefully sweeps stray powder into a wooden tray, the bristles making a soft brushing sound that feels almost like whispering. He sets the mortar aside with a muted thunk and covers the cauldron, trapping the steam with a final hiss. Historians still debate whether spice grinding was done daily in most households or saved for big market days, but seeing this late-night work makes you think there was probably always at least one mortar singing somewhere in town. You leave with a small packet of ground ginger, the faint powdery rattle inside marking every step you take. Behind you, the apothecary's grinding begins again, slower now, like a lullaby played on stone. The sound fades as you walk into the quiet street, and for a moment the entire night feels softer, as if the whole city has been gently stirred and then left to settle. Your path winds back toward the main road, where the faint glow of torchlight leads you to something bigger, louder, and far more public than the quiet apothecary. You step into an open square and realize you've stumbled upon a festival feast in full swing. The first thing you hear is the sizzling, an entire row of street vendors working their woks over roaring fires, each one sending up a chorus of crackles, hisses, and pops that sound like 100 tiny fireworks going off at once. Someone tosses a handful of vegetables into hot oil, and the resulting whoosh makes you flinch before grinning like you meant to. The vendor laughs, giving his wok a dramatic shake so the contents rattle like a metal maraca. The smell is incredible: garlic, ginger, a whiff of sesame oil, and the sounds are just as intense. Mainstream historians agree that large communal feasts were a cornerstone of Chinese festivals, often sponsored by local officials to keep spirits and bellies full. Historians still argue whether these events were as inclusive as they're sometimes portrayed. Was everyone welcome, or was there a VIP table somewhere nearby? Judging by the noise and laughter around you tonight, it feels like nobody's being left out. At the edge of the square, a man is pounding rice into sticky cakes with a massive wooden mallet. Each strike lands with a deep whomp that echoes across the space, followed by the sticky slop of the rice folding over itself. A helper flips the rice between strikes with lightning speed, and the two of them keep up a rhythm so perfect you'd swear it was rehearsed. People gather just to listen, clapping in time with the pounding. A quirky detail you catch from a nearby gossip: some families believed the sound of pounding rice on festival nights would scare away bad luck and invite prosperity for the year ahead. Judging by how loud these guys are, this village must be planning to get very lucky. Farther along, vendors sell skewers of grilled meat, and you hear the faint zzzz of fat dripping onto the coals, followed by a sharp hiss as flames leap up. Someone bites into a skewer too quickly and yelps, which makes the crowd laugh. The noise is constant: laughter, sizzling, the clink of cups being knocked together in toasts, the occasional shout from a vendor hawking fresh buns. Drummers appear at one end of the square, and suddenly the whole feast has a soundtrack. The drums are deep and rolling, like distant thunder, and soon flutes join in, their high notes weaving between the crackle of woks. The music and cooking sounds layer together until you can't tell which is leading the rhythm. Historians still debate whether music during meals was standard practice or just for festivals, but tonight it's clear that sound is half the experience. Even the children join in by banging their wooden bowls like improvised percussion instruments. You grab a cup of warm rice wine, and when you sip, you can actually hear the faint fizz as it slides past the rim. It's sweet and sharp, and you find yourself swaying to the beat of the drums while chewing on a dumpling. The feast seems to go on forever. Even as some stalls pack up, others keep sizzling away. You hear the scrape of metal spatulas, the squeal of ladles against woks, the clatter of plates being stacked. The square smells like smoke and spice, and the air feels warmer just from all the activity. When the music finally slows, the drums fade one by one until only the soft crackle of the last cooking fires remains. People begin to drift away, and you're left with the faint smell of charcoal and the echo of 100 conversations. The quiet feels almost too sudden, like the city just turned the volume knob all the way down. The festival square empties behind you, leaving just a faint haze of smoke curling into the night sky. You follow the road out of town, and soon the city lights fade until the stars seem almost close enough to touch. At first, there's no sound at all, just the soft crunch of your footsteps, but then you hear it, the low, wet croak of frogs and the distant rush of water over stones. You've reached a small riverside farmhouse, where one last late-night meal is being prepared. Inside, an old woman sits by a small hearth, stirring congee in a clay pot. The bubbling is slow and steady, a gentle plop 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 that fills the room like a soft drumbeat. Each time she stirs, the wooden spoon makes a quiet scraping sound along the pot's bottom, comforting in its rhythm. Mainstream historians agree that congee, rice porridge, was one of the most common comfort foods across China, eaten by rich and poor alike. Historians still argue whether it was originally a thrifty dish to stretch rice supplies or a deliberate health food, but either way, its soft bubbling was probably the lullaby of countless households. You sit by the fire, and the warmth seeps into your bones. The woman adds ginger slices to the pot, and the smell brightens instantly, carrying that warm, spicy bite. You can hear the ginger hissing as it hits the hot porridge before melting into the mixture. A quirky detail she mentions with a smile: some people believed the sound of bubbling congee was a good omen, and that if it went silent too soon, the family's luck might run thin. She leans close, listening carefully for the tiny, steady pops, and nods in satisfaction. Outside, a few chickens mutter in their sleep, and somewhere far away, a dog barks once before going quiet. The night feels still, but not empty. The sounds are softer now, smaller, as if the whole world has decided to whisper. When the congee is ready, the woman ladles it into bowls, the liquid hitting with a quiet, soothing splash. You sip carefully, hearing the faint slurp you make in the silence. The warmth spreads through you, and you suddenly realize just how tired you are. The fire crackles softly, the porridge bubbles slower, and the frogs outside sing a lazy chorus. It feels like everything is winding down, every market, every kitchen, every forge, and the whole world is slowly closing its eyes. You lean back against the wooden wall, the faint heat of the hearth still on your skin, and let your breathing slow. The sounds around you feel softer now, like someone is turning down the dial on the entire night. The frogs keep croaking, but their rhythm grows slower, more spaced out, until it feels like they're just keeping time for your heartbeat. The last bubbles in the pot rise and pop one by one, each softer than the last. The wooden spoon rests against the rim, no longer scraping, just sitting there like a tired companion. The fire has burned low, the logs collapsing into glowing embers that sigh every now and then, sending a faint crackle into the room. Even outside, the world seems quieter. The wind moves gently through the grass, brushing against the walls with a whisper, like it's trying not to wake anyone. Somewhere down the road, a late traveler's cart creaks softly as it passes, but even that fades quickly into the distance. You close your eyes, but you can still hear it all, the faint drip of water outside, the crickets keeping their steady rhythm, the ghost of the market clatter and the noodle slurping laughter you heard earlier. It's as if the entire day is replaying softly, just for you, before slipping away into sleep. The night stretches, warm and safe, the stars watching overhead. You let your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, and your thoughts slow until all that's left is the quiet hum of a world that has finally gone still. And with that, we leave ancient China behind for now. Good night, traveler, sleep well, and may your dreams be as full as that last warm bowl of congee.